I'm Farhan Shaikh, grade 12. Joining me today is Akash Ashish Nair, grade 8, and young history enthusiast with a curious mind. Welcome, Akash.
Farhan, I'm honored to be here.
Today, we are venturing beyond the recorded page into the untold truths of history. Akash, when you hear the phrase untold truths, what immediately comes to your mind?
I think of all the stories that never really made it to our textbooks, the voices that were silenced, the perspectives that were erased or overlooked. History feels like a story told by the victors, but I've always wondered what the other side looks like.
That is precisely the heart of our discussion today. The written record is never complete, it is curated, edited, and often sanitized. Today, we will examine history through three lenses: who gets remembered, what gets erased, and how we can uncover what lies beneath. Akash, let us begin with a simple question. When you think of great historical figures, who comes to mind?
I think kings, emperors, generals, people like Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., people who led nations or movements.
A predictable but honest answer. Now consider this. History, as we know it, is disproportionately shaped by a tiny fraction of humanity. Akash, what percentage of historical figures do you think were women?
I think maybe 5 to 10%. At least that's what's written in some of the textbooks that I've read.
You're not far off. In standard curricula, women account for less than 10% of named historical figures. And yet, women have always been half the population. Akash, what does this disparity tell you?
It tells me that history isn't about who was important, it's about who wrote the history. For most of human civilization, the writers were wealthy, educated men. So naturally, they will write about people who are like themselves.
Exactly. This is what historians call the canon, the accepted body of knowledge, and it is deeply biased. Akash, can you name a single female scientist from before the 20th century?
Marie Curie, I think, but she was 20th century. Before that, Hypatia, I've heard of her, but that's about it.
Hypatia of Alexandria, a brilliant mathematician and philosopher, murdered in 415 CE. But consider this: Ada Lovelace, the world's first computer programmer; Mary Anning, who revolutionized paleontology; Rosalind Franklin, whose work was stolen to discover DNA. Akash, why do you think these names are not household ones?
There were women in male dominated fields. Their contributions were dismissed, attributed to male colleagues, or simply forgotten. It's not that they didn't exist, it's that the record keepers chose not to preserve their stories.
Precisely. Now let us extend this question to race and geography. Akash, what civilizations are you taught about in school?
I think ancient Greek, Rome, the British Empire, the World Wars, some Indian history too, the Maurya and Gupta empires, but mostly Western history.
That is a standard narrative. But what of the Mali Empire, whose wealth once dwarfed Europe? What of the Khmer Empire, which built Angkor Wat, the largest religious monument on earth? What of the great Zimbabwe civilization, whose stone structures were so advanced that European colonizers refused to believe that Africans had built them? Akash, what is your reaction to that?
Treated. Entire civilizations were erased because they did not fit into the colonial narrative. If you don't record your history, someone else will definitely record it for you, usually inaccurately.
That is a profound observation, and it leads us directly to our second lens. Akash, let us discuss erasure. There is a famous quote: history is written by the victors. What does that mean to you?
It means the winners get to control the story. If you win a war, you decide what happened, why it happened, and who the heroes and villains are. The losers don't really get a voice.
Correct. And this is not merely metamorphical. Entire events have been systematically removed from public memory. Akash, are you familiar with the Tulsa Race massacre?
I've heard of it vaguely. It happened in the United States, right? A wealthy black neighborhood was destroyed.
Yes, in 1921, The Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, known as the Black Wall Street, was one of the most prosperous black communities in America. Over the course of 2 days, a white mob, aided by local authorities, burned it to the ground. Up to 300 people were killed. Over 1,000 homes were destroyed. Akash, what do you think happened to this event in American history textbooks?
I'm guessing it wasn't mentioned at all. For decades, probably.
Precisely. The Tulsa Race massacre was actively suppressed from public discourse for nearly 80 years. It was not included in standard curricula. Newspapers that covered it were confiscated. Survivors were threatened into silence. Akash, why would a nation erase its own history?
It's embarrassing because it reveals uncomfortable truths. Because it's easier to pretend you were always the good guys than to admit you did something terrible. But erasing history does not undo it. It just means you never learned from it.
That is an incredibly mature perspective. And it brings us to another form of erasure, the erasure of indigenous knowledge. Akash, before European colonization, do you know what diseases existed in the Americas?
Really, I assume they had sicknesses, but I don't know specifics.
The Americas had remarkably few epidemic diseases. Smallpox, measles, influenza. These did not exist there until Europeans arrived. Akash, why do you think that is?
Those diseases originated in domesticated animals. Europe had cows, pigs, chickens. The Americans had llamas and guinea pigs. So, Europeans had built immunity over the centuries, but indigenous Americans had none.
Exactly. And when contact occurred, up to 90% of the indigenous population died, not from warfare, but from disease. Akash, what does this tell us about the so called discovery of the Americas?
It wasn't a discovery, it was an invasion. And the death toll was so high that the survivors couldn't maintain their records. Their stories were literally wiped out of the sheer scale of the catastrophe. That's erasure through biological disaster, not just politics.
A critical distinction. Now let us turn to the third lens. Akash, if so much has been erased, how do we recover it? This is the most important question for any historian. Let me introduce you to three methods.
I'm ready.
First, oral history. Akash, what is the oldest story you were told by your grandparents?
My grandmother told me about our family's migration from Kerala to Mumbai. She said they traveled by foot for weeks, carrying everything they owned. That's not something you find in textbooks.
And yet, that story is history. Oral traditions, songs, folk tales, family narratives preserve what written records omit. For thousands of years, human memory was the only archive. In West Africa, the griots, oral historians, could recite centuries of genealogies and events. Akash, do you think oral history is reliable?
It's different from written history. Memory can change over time, but that does not mean it's false. It means it's a different kind of truth. Personal, lived, emotional. That has value too.
Well said. Second, archaeology. Akash, what can bones tell us that paper cannot?
Bones can tell you what people ate, what diseases they had, and how they died. They can reveal violence or malnutrition. They can even show migration patterns. Bones don't lie, at least not the way written records can.
Exactly. The archaeological record is often more truthful than the textual record. For example, for decades, historians believed that indigenous Americans were primitive hunter gatherers. Then, archaeologists discovered sophisticated irrigation systems, massive earthworks, and cities like Kakoa, which had a population larger than London at the time. Akash, what does that tell you?
I think it tells me that when you only rely on written records, you see what the literate people want to tell you. The illiterate majority, their lives, their achievements are invisible until you dig for them.
Right. Third, revisionist history. Akash, what does that term mean to you?
I think it sounds like rewriting history, but I think it's more about re examining history with new evidence or new perspectives. It's not changing the past, it's understanding it better.
Exactly. Revisionist historians do not change history, they challenge long held assumptions. Consider the colonization of Africa. For centuries, the narrative was that Europeans brought civilization to a backward continent. But revisionist historians have showed that Africa had advanced kingdoms, trade networks, and universities before any Europeans arrived. The colonization narrative was not history, it was propaganda. Akash, what is the danger of resisting revision?
The danger is that you get stuck with the same old myths, and those myths can be dangerous. If you believe one group is naturally inferior, that belief can justify oppression. History isn't just about the past, it's about how we justify the present.
That is the most important thing you have said today. History is never neutral, it is always political, and that is why we must interrogate it. Akash, we have covered a great deal: the bias in who gets remembered, the erasure of uncomfortable truths, and the methods we use to recover what has been lost. Let me ask you a final question. Why does this matter, especially for someone your age?
Because I am going to inherit the world that history has shaped. If I don't understand where we came from, the real story, not the sanitized version, I won't be able to fix what's broken. And I don't want to repeat the same mistakes of the past just because I have never learned about them.
That is a remarkable answer. Let me add to it. Understanding untold truths also make us humble. It reminds us that our perspective is limited. Every civilization believed it was the center of the world. Every empire believed it would last forever. They were wrong. And one day, people will look back at us and they will find our blind spots too. So, history is
So
really about humility. Then, accepting that you don't know everything and staying curious.
that is exactly right. History is not a collection of dead facts. It's a living conversation across generations. And now we're a part of it. I think that's the most important truth in history, that there is no single truth. Every story has multiple sides. Every document has a bias. Every victory has a cost. If you want to understand the past, you have to look beyond the recorded page and listen to the voices that were never allowed to speak.
A powerful conclusion. I am Farhan Shaikh, grade 12.
And I'm Akash Ashish Nair, grade 8.
Thank you for listening to the Time Travelers podcast. Thank you.